Before we get started, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so that you don't miss any of the content that is released by GoCollect. And if you're interested, head over to Regie Collects here on YouTube. Regie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector and the host of the GoCollect speculation video, and I want to welcome you to another episode. Before we dig into the 6th blog post for this episode, I want to give you a heads up on something. GoCollect has recently launched a swag shop. You have an opportunity to pick up some awesome GoCollect branded swag, including things like the t-shirt that I wear in this video. If you head over to shop.gocollect.com, you can find a couple of different things that you may want to pick up. And I will tell you that GoCollect has plans to introduce additional swag down the line. So you definitely want to check out the shop on an ongoing basis. Now, with that said, if you use my discount code, you can actually save yourself a couple of bucks. And that code is Regie, R-E-G-I-E. You plug that in and you are off and running. So let's go ahead and take a look at these blog posts. The very first blog post is an ongoing series called Almost Infamous. And in this series, the blogger essentially tries to cast a light on some lesser known characters and asks the question as to whether there is some speculative potential associated with these characters. In the case of this blog post, we are talking about Ulysses Klaw, and that name may sound familiar to many people out there. If you've been reading comics for a while, this is a character that is squared off against the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, and also the Black Panther. And for some, the name resonates because he was in the Black Panther movie. And yes, he was killed, but the blogger is essentially asking the question in this post as to whether Klaw can come back, because he, in the comics, was actually turned into pure sound. So his body was killed off and he was turned into sound, and in the comics he died and returned several times. And so there could be an opportunity for Ulysses Klaw to make a return in the MCU. His first appearance was actually in Fantastic Four issue number 53, and this was back in 1966, and his introduction was courtesy of the great and legendary Stan Lee and Jack Kirby collaboration. So I definitely encourage you to check this blog post out, because the blogger really does a good job of helping us to understand Ulysses Klaw, his motivations, where he's coming from, and also points us in the direction of why he potentially could make a comeback. The link to this blog post is down in the description. This next blog post is hot. And it is hot because it is all about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, who are hot right now, partially because of the Last Ronin comic, which came out recently. This book was the talk of the hobby. I read it, I enjoyed it, and I get why people are excited about this. In this blog post, the blogger does a solid job of identifying a couple of books that you may want to check out if you believe that this is the start of a new age for the Turtles. He points out some data in here about the original issue number 1 of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and unless you have $50,000 burning a hole in your pocket, this potentially is not the book for you. But with that said, the blogger goes on to talk about several other books that have a lot of potential, including the most recent, The Last Ronin. The regular cover price for The Last Ronin issue number 1 has a high sales price of about $120 at a 9.8. The 1 in 10 variant actually went recently for $139 at a CGC 9.8. Taking a step away from the recent issues, you can go back to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles issue number 51. This book has actually been picking up steam in the last 3 months because it is the first appearance of Jennika, who goes on to actually become a turtle herself in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles issue number 95. So again, the turtles are one of those intellectual properties that is multi-generational. Turtle power is here to stay. The link to this blog post, if you are curious, is down in the description. Give it a read. E.T. meets Battlestar Galactica. That is the description that our next blogger gives 2 books that he talks about in his blog post. And we are specifically talking about Descender issue number 1 and Ascender issue number 1. It's a little sci-fi turned fantasy. And over the course of this blog post, the blogger talks about 2 creators that have essentially come together a couple of times to produce some awesome comics. And we are specifically talking about Jeff Lemire and Dustin Nguyen, who again have come together to work on Descender issue number 1 with its 14 covers and the most recent Ascender issue number 1. In this blog post, the blogger does a pretty solid job of explaining why these 2 series are pretty hot, and it has a lot to do with the storytelling on one side and the wonderful artwork on the other side, and magic is actually being made. But in this blog post, the blogger talks about how he essentially uses speculation around the book and a title or 2 that he really enjoys, and he leverages his speculative activities to pay off some of his purchases for his personal collection. And this is a great example of making the hobby pay for itself, which is something that I am a huge fan of. If you are curious about anything that I've just said here in the last couple of minutes, you should check out this blog post. As I've mentioned earlier in this video, the link is down in the description. If you have been paying attention for the last year or so, you know that She-Hulk is pretty hot right now. And she's hot because of all of the speculation around the upcoming Disney Plus streaming show that is going to be coming out. But then the other part of things is that Marvel has been putting She-Hulk front and center for a while in several different titles, including the most recent Immortal She-Hulk one-shot that they put out, which basically said that She-Hulk, like other gamma mutates, is essentially immortal. And so there has been a little bit of a tear as it relates to speculation around this character, and a lot of copy has been generated to talk about the excitement and the speculative value associated with She-Hulk. This next blogger actually does a really good job of basically reminding us of all of the great content that's come out on GoCollect from the various bloggers about She-Hulk. And I'm specifically talking about 2020 speculation. She-Hulk number 1 versus Avengers Annual number 10 by Ryan. Post D23 Savage She-Hulk number 1 by Matt Tuck. Fan favorite Sensational She-Hulk number 1 by Norman. And then there's also the She-Hulk is Coming Up by Matthew. Those are just some of the more recent blog posts that have been put out that focus specifically on She-Hulk. There's probably many others that have at least mentioned some books associated with her or some excitement, but these are a couple that you may want to check out. The blogger, for his part, actually asked the question as to whether all of this excitement around She-Hulk and She-Hulk's, comics, whether any of that has spilled over to affect original art. And I'm not going to give it away for you, but I will tell you that the blogger offers up a couple of tips for things that you may want to consider if you decide that you do want to speculate with original art associated with She-Hulk. And I will tell you that I'm really excited about some of the trends that I am seeing in some of the blog posts that have been coming out from GoCollect that are not just looking at comics. They are actually looking at original art, because original art is a part of the hobby as well. And it is an exciting part of the hobby that I am interested in learning more about. So shout out to all of those bloggers that are continuing to put out this great content looking at all aspects of our hobby. What the fuck? That is the sentiment of the blog post that we are about to talk about right now. This blogger is essentially trying to capture that moment that many of us have when we see some of the insane prices that people pay for comics. And I use that term insane loosely, right? I really do use that term loosely, but there are some pretty interesting prices that we are seeing right now for comics, for original art, and for things that are associated with comics, right? And we've seen it on auctions, whether they be on eBay or Heritage. We have seen some really crazy prices that have popped up that have caught many of us off guard. And I think that this blogger is positioned to actually do an ongoing series in which he highlights some of these crazy moments where prices have gotten out of control that have left us all with those what just happened moments, or those oh sugar moments, as I like to call them. And so in this specific blog post, the blogger takes a look at a recent sale of a comic that you don't see all that often. Now, what's really interesting about this is that this was a raw book. It was a raw book that sold for double the price of an actual graded comic. And that assumes that whoever graded the comic graded it correctly, and if so, it essentially matches up to a 5.0 CGC. And as I mentioned, that raw book went for double the price of the most recent sale of that exact book. What the fuck? And we are specifically talking about Albedo issue number 2. And this is one of those obscure comics that has its fan base, that people absolutely love this comic. And because the book doesn't come up for sale all that often, because you don't see it all that often, you have to be willing to jump on these opportunities. And that is clearly what happened recently with this eBay sale. To the point that I was just making, there are only 282 graded copies of this book on the CGC census. Now, what makes that really important is that the print run was only 2,000 copies. And this is part of the reason why this is one of those books from the Copper Age that people will jump on. So to that point, what we saw is that someone actually paid $4,941 for a VG fine copy of this book. Now that corresponds, a VG fine corresponds to a 5.0 graded copy. And again, if that VG fine does indeed prove to be that and matches up, a 5.0 of Albedo issue number 2 recently sold for $2,399 against an FMV of $2,400. And again, this is just a great example of the fact that collectors that really want something will pony up the money to be able to buy those books that they want for their collection, especially when those books are truly rare. And you were talking about a book that has a print run of 2,000 copies, and there's only 282 copies out there that have the potential to actually exchange hands. That's pretty tough stuff. So again, I think that this is going to be a pretty interesting ongoing series that I cannot wait to read, because again, we all see some of these auction prices. This next blog post is probably one of the better blog posts that I have read. And I say that because the blogger has done two really great things. First, they've done a lot of research, and they have dug into the release dates of a specific character and lay that data out in front of the reader. The second thing that they've done is to basically say, here's the data, you decide what the truth is. And once you decide what the truth is, then you decide, what do you do with that knowledge? That to me is a great way to do a blog post, right? I mean, there's a lot of ways to do great blog posts, don't get me wrong, but this is a great way because the blogger has taken the time to do the research that many of us haven't done or won't do. They've done that. And then they don't tell us what to think. They say, here's the data, you decide what you want to do. And what we are specifically talking about here is the first appearance of Null, and more importantly, the first cover appearance of Null. And there are a lot of people out there that are paying a lot of big bucks for Venom issue number 3, third printing. This book currently at a 9.8 has a fair market value of $550. And it has that high price because it is the first appearance of Null. It is believed to be the first cover appearance of Null. And it's also a later print run. It's a third print run, which in many ways tends to be a smaller print run. And for all of those reasons, this book is commanding some high prices. But the blogger is essentially calling into question at least one of those elements. They are questioning whether this book is indeed the first cover appearance of Null. And to the point that I made earlier, they laid out the chronological dates. And I can tell you that it's not the first cover appearance of Null. The actual first cover appearance of Null happens to have an FMV of $150 and came out before the third printing. And again, you have to read this blog post. You really do. Here comes the question. Is it worth it to pay all of that money for a later printing when part of the reason why the book is significant is actually invalid? That's the provocative question. Another question I would ask is there some speculative value in the book that is actually the first cover appearance of Null? That's part of the question right there. And I will tell you, when you look these books up in the CGC database, neither of them is identified as being the first cover appearance. And so it's like, might that change in the future? Might CGC go back and revise that label and designate the true book as the first cover appearance? And I'm not going to tell you what that book is. You got to read the blog post. So there you have it. We have reached the end of another recap video. If you enjoyed this video, I certainly want to encourage you to hit the thumbs up button. And if you're feeling frisky, go ahead and leave a comment behind and we will mix it up down in the comment section. If you truly enjoyed the content that I presented over the course of this video from these fantastic bloggers, I want to encourage you to come back next week when we get to do it all over again.